a question, don't forget elizabethroebuckjones.com/ask. I have a question here this morning. It is short. I wish the person had written me a little bit more, because then I could talk more and I could give more information. So if that person is listening now or is going to be listening, and I hope they will be, because that's the whole point of doing this, they can write back to me and give me more info if they want. Hi, Roma, how are they? Are you? And all you have to say is, I was the person that wrote about giving up everything and moving in with my partner, and I'll remember who you are, and then just give me some more info and I can come back in and I can do a part 2. And I know we've got one particular question where we've done that, where we normally have the questions, they have a quote from my answer, then they have the first part of the question and my answer, and then we just put a part 2 and then put the rest of the answer. So it's all good. It all goes on the blog. It's all gorgeous, and I don't want you to feel like, you know, you can't write back to me if there's anything else you'd like me to answer. But yes, I would have liked more. Anyway, I'm going to get started. All right. I really love your site in Facebook and what you have to say. Isn't that gorgeous? I have a question. At this moment, I am involved in a same-sex marriage. It is very rocky. So I'm guessing this person's in America, because we don't have same-sex marriage here in Australia, or at least not recognised marriage. I think people can get married, but it's not recognised, and that's a whole other debate I won't go into because I'm very cross and upset about it. All right. At this moment, I'm involved in a same-sex marriage, and it is very rocky. Lots of stress. I loved your talk about monster-in-law, dragon lady, because my son and I moved in with my partner and her mother, who is a nightmare. It has been so topsy-turvy. We were married in July. It can get verbally abusive. I feel because of the stress. All the unsteadiness triggers my fears of abandonment and unworthiness. I gave up everything to move in with her, including being near my family, job, and familiar surroundings. I have since sent my 17-year-old son to live with my mum to finish out the school year in another state. I guess my question is, how do I work on my own fears, build myself back up, and know the ways to work on this relationship to see if I can make it, to see if it can make it. Thanks so much. All right, now I've got a lot to work on, but I have picked up some things in this question that I think are important to talk about, and maybe what I talk about will be enough to help you, maybe not. And if it isn't, as I said, send me another question, and just make sure you give me an indication that it goes with this one, and then we can keep it all together on the blog. All right. So what I want to talk to you about, first of all, is the fact that you have moved away far from home. And that means all your support system's been taken away from you. And I want to talk about that in a minute. But what I do want to talk about is, on top of moving away from all your support systems, all your familiarity, and I presume even your job if you're working, is you've moved in with your partner and her mother. Now, from what I can understand, I could be wrong, but the sense I get is that your partner and her mother have had a house and you've moved into it with your son. And can I tell you that making a decision to do that, if I'd known you before you did that, I would have cautioned you around it. Because when you move into an established space, and remember, hopefully you've all been listening to my mother-in-law talk, we all have fresh in our minds all the challenges that mother-in-laws cope with, and I won't go into those. I'll invite you to watch the Facebook Live on that. It's in the news feed. But remembering all of those challenges, plus the fact that your partner has an established house and established ways that she and her mum have been doing things. You know, down to the pot plant lives there. Mary Very, so hard in this double whammy situation, poor darling heart. Oh, absolutely. You know, how often the plants get watered, where things live in the house. There will have had to have made a space for you. And I wonder, you know, it's interesting when I've had talks with couples about this, both, you know, hetero and same-sex. It's a similar problem because often what's said is, I don't feel like this space is my own, you know, the ones that have moved in. I don't feel like it's my own. I feel like somehow I'm kind of, it's almost like renting, but even worse, because you feel like you can't touch things, or if you do touch or move things, sometimes World War III breaks out because it turned out that it was, you know, the late Uncle Herman's ashes that have always lived, you know, in that corner. Or, you know, I mean, it's not an experience I've had myself, but I always think of when my step-grandmother passed away. We had a new minister at our local church, and he thought it was very important as a new minister to come and visit us. And he walked in the house and he sat in my grandmother's chair. And my mother and I just looked at each other like, oh, he sat in Grandma's chair. Like, no! Like, it was all we could do to cope with him being there because he'd done that. And I thought, you know, that's a classic example of where you're at. You don't know the history of what's around you that's been set up by your partner and your mother-in-law. And inadvertently, you could just walk in and sit in the very chair that you're not meant to sit in, or move the vase that you're not meant to move. Or so it's like being a guest, and only worse than that, because a guest you'd excuse, but someone that you're in a relationship with, there's suddenly all this emotional angst that goes along with it. So that would be, you know, that's something that I think you really need to talk to your partner about and actually name and really talk through, because often there's a feeling you don't have enough space, or a feeling you don't have permission, or a feeling that you're somehow camping or not settled. So I think that probably does need to be talked about with your partner. I generally say to couples that come to me that might be planning to get together. I've had couples that have been so anxious because they've had such, you know, failed relationships in the past that they've been planning to move in together. And as soon as they said to me, oh yes, you know, Fred's going to move in with Mary, or Mary's going to move in with Fred, or if it's a same-sex couple, you know, the two women are going to move together, I've often said, look, if it's an established home, can you possibly either gut the home, move everything out, sell all the furniture, change the colour of the walls, put new carpet in, empty the kitchen out as far as practicable, move everything, change everything, even have a different room for the bedroom, change everything, and remake the place your place, rather than you know, one partner moving in with the other, if I'm being clear. It's not always possible to sell a house, and I'm aware of that houses are terribly expensive. You really do have to pick your time in the market. I've even had couples say to me where they've decided to rent the house they were going to move into, and rent, you know, so that they get an income off it, and then they've rented elsewhere to actually have a fresh space to start in. I think it's incredibly important, and to break that connection with the original house, because of course as soon as you've rented it, you've got to empty it, you've got to set it up for renters, and it kind of breaks a bit of that emotional connection. So that is, you know, what I would say to you, that, you know, something needs to happen there. So that to me is your big signal as to why there might be issues. The next one is the added complication of your mother-in-law living with you. And unfortunately, if she's a dinosaur and you're describing her as a monster, you know, and I don't know how old you are, but you've got a 17-year-old son. So that tells me straight away that, you know, you're in my vintage, you're certainly not young, that you've got an ancient mother-in-law who's probably very misinformed about same-sex relationships, and that basically she may well be in this space where she thinks that you're choosing to be same-sex orientated. She could be angry with her daughter if her daughter hasn't had children. She could have very closed thinking about the possibility of a same-sex partner having children. You know, she might just be really in the dinosaur age with all of this. And if that's the case, you know, she may well be very aware of her anger. Roma, I totally agree with you here. It was a stumbling block in our marriage. We should never have started our marriage in my house. He never thought it was ours. Yeah. Mary, I don't like that this partner is to her too. I'm not is mean to her. Yeah, Mary, I'm not sure. I haven't got a lot to go on here, Mary, but it does say that there's things here about verbal aggression, which I'm going to get to. But I do want to talk about what's happening with this dragon lady, because I think on top of all the stuff I talked about in my other Facebook Live, I do think there's the complication that this is a same-sex relationship, and I really do believe that that is probably contributing to a whole lot of passive-aggressive anger being taken out on the person that sent me this question. I really do. Because if she's old, that's how she's going to be thinking. And it's just so, I find it so frustrating. I actually had a conversation with someone who knows a friend of mine who's same sex, and some of the stuff that was coming out of her mouth, and because she wasn't a family member or somebody that, you know, I had any reason to have a long-term friendship with, I just put the boot in. And I haven't had, because I was so angry with her, some of the things she was saying, I was just so angry, and I haven't had the heart to tell my gay friend that she said this, and he knows her and has really gone out of his way to help her, and I haven't had the heart to tell him that this is what she really thinks of him. And I was just so angry. I was so angry. Anyway, so that's what I think is happening, and unfortunately it won't matter what you say to this dragon lady, she's not going to change her thinking. She's just not. And Yay, you. Yeah, no, I did. I was so angry. I was so angry with her. Things about, she was saying things like that he was choosing it. That he was choosing to live his life same-sex orientated, and he had, and the poor thing had been very repressed. He'd been married. He'd grown up in a country town where if he had come out, he would have been murdered. Like, I know what Australian country towns are like. He would have absolutely, hi Savvy, how are you? He would have been murdered. Like, there's no way he could have come out. I know where he grew up. And for many men, it's so difficult because they have so many pressures on them, and he just repressed all of that. He has children. He's been through becoming true to himself and who he is as a person, and the rejection of his children and everything. And for her to say that he chose this, I was just, some of the things she said was just, and yet at the same time, she is in this man's life quite through business and personal. And I just, ugh. And she's so nice to his face, which makes me want to punch her. It makes her a hypocrite, really. But anyway, I cracked it, as you do. So, but of course, I don't think it's going to make any difference if you were to even sit down with this woman, this dragon lady, and just explain the whole thing and your whole life. Because you're telling me you have a son, which means you've repressed how you feel. And you've lived in a hetero relationship, which must have been so difficult for you to live out and to feel that in order to be able to live your life and have things like children and family and acceptance maybe from other people, you've had to compromise who you really are. And that's just devastating to me. I can't even, absolutely savvy, passive-aggressive. And so I just don't think, even if you could even explain all that to her, that she would understand any of it. And I think you're copying that, and I think you're copying fear of loss and being out of control. And she probably doesn't, you know, and maybe it's her house. I don't know. And if it's her house, she probably doesn't want you there. She feels like she doesn't have a say. You know, the list goes on. So I don't know that there's going to be a lot you can do about her. And that's going to be, you know, it really becomes about managing her. I don't know what's happening with these arguments with your partner. You've said here it can get verbally abusive. I feel because of the stress. Now, I don't know whether that's you making excuses for her, because people can be stressed and they don't have to be aggressive and verbally abusive. You know, it's really important that you don't put the stress or depression or anxiety or bipolar or physical illness or whatever it is, you don't use that as an excuse for someone being abusive. Savvy, yeah, really important. I'm thinking about what happened only 2 Fridays ago in Melbourne with the guy that had the mental illness that was clearly in some form of bipolar, probably bipolar schizophrenia, I'm not sure. But there was definitely grandiosity going on, and definitely, you know, all these life and death thoughts. There are many people in the community who struggle with feelings of violence every day because of mental illness, and they don't act out on them. And to minimize what he did by saying it was his mental illness insults every single one of those persons that manages their behavior, their feelings every single day. So please, please, please do not minimize that behavior by saying she's stressed. That's not okay. If she is verbally abusive to you, that's not okay. You really need to do something about it, because what happens usually is verbal abuse comes first, and then there's a push. And I would see couples and they would say, it was just a little push. But a little push can be, I landed backwards in the pantry and I hit my head. Or one particular case I can tell you about of a couple where I asked them if ever they'd been physically violent, and they both paused, and what came out was a story where he had pushed her, she had fallen and broken her jaw and ended up in hospital. And it was the first time he'd ever touched her, but he, you know, the arguments had escalated and escalated and escalated, and he had pushed her, she had stumbled and broken her jaw, and then it was the, how do we explain this? And it was, oh, I tripped, you know? And it had certainly, from their own experience, they really understood where I was coming from, that it's not the push, it's what happens next. It's the furniture you fall over. It's who gets caught in the crossfire. So be really mindful that if it's verbally abusive like this, there is a risk that it will step over into being physically abusive, and then you're not safe. It's not safe for either of you. So you really must look at how you're going to address these arguments. Now, there is a post on my blog, and I know it's up. I've written a whole lot, and I get, oh, thank you, Savvy. I get really confused about what's up and what isn't, because I've written quite a lot, because I've got a surprise for you. I've got this wonderful ebook you're going to download, and it hasn't got a lot of reading in it, but it's got lots of questions you can answer, which we're also going to answer in the group. And it's got heaps of links to blog posts, and I'm just waiting to see how it goes, because if lots of you download it, then obviously I'll load all these blog posts up onto my blog, and suddenly it'll go from a blog being this big to being this big. But if you girls sort of don't engage with it, then I'm not going to worry about it. I'll just let them flow out as we've scheduled them, just because I don't want to flood my blog, if that makes sense. But look, if you all engage in the idea I've had, then obviously, you know, I'm going to want to put all this writing up. Verbal abuse is not safe either. No, Mary, because it creates trauma, and it takes you into being emotionally unsafe. However, the physical safety, of course, is, well, to me, it's paramount in my head, because that's life or death. That's not, and I know trauma is a horrible thing to be in, but life or death, I think, kind of sits. If you notice my writing, I'll often say be emotionally and physically safe, but actually, if I'm being really politically correct, you talk about the physical safety first. So I want you to go to my blog. That's what I was carrying on about. I want you to go to my blog. Thanks, Roma. Well, it means you don't have to read what you don't want to read, is kind of why I've created the ebook like that. So it goes through the 14 different areas, and I've thought of more since I've written it, and it may get an update if you girls like it. But it's the 14 different areas of conflict, and the idea is I want you to work out your own boundaries and what you think about all of these 14 different areas. So the idea is we've got a short paragraph you can read that introduces you to the idea. You've got a whole lot of blogs you can choose to read or not read, depending on what you want to do. There are some of them have only got 4 questions, some have got as many as 8 questions. Then we've got a section for writing, and you can choose whether you want to print out the whole ebook or you want to do it online. I'm looking at the moment as to whether we can make it an interactive ebook, and I haven't heard back from the people that are building the ebook, which, because I lost Joyce, and that's a whole other story, I've got someone else building it, so it's been a little bit slower to get it all done, but it's almost there. So, and then what we're going to do is we're going to have, on Fridays, I'm going to slowly put the questions up in the group, and so we can talk about them in the group and discuss them in the group as well. So it's going to be a group activity for everybody. I'm really excited about it. It's going to be called Your No Line, and really take you into that space of talking about the nitty-gritty of relationships. So I do know, if I get back to this question, I do know that this blog post is definitely on my blog, and the other 2 I think might be good are Managing Your Anger and Understanding Your Anger. So I'll put links to those in the comments, but definitely the post on timeout. The reason that I want you to look at timeout is I want you to negotiate how you're going to argue. And when I tell couples this, they'll say, "What? You want us to talk about how we're going to argue? We don't want to argue at all." Well, the reality is you will argue. All couples argue. Some more than others, but they all do. And if you are in this space where you've got this verbal abuse going, then you really need to call some boundaries about what's going on with that. So that means if you're returning fire, and we've all done it, and even if you're not swearing, even if you're just saying nasty things, I want you to pull yourself up. And I'll talk about that in a minute. But what I want you to do is I want you to talk to your partner about this. Now, you can go to my blog and you can look at the blog post on timeout, and you can print it if you don't want your partner to look at it, or you can use it as a reference to go and look on the internet. There are a truckload of articles on timeout. Don't think mine's the only one and I'm the pioneer of the idea, because I'm not. So if you want to keep this space sacred for yourself and you don't want your partner here, just use it as a reference and go and do a little bit of Google searching once you've educated yourself on what timeout is, and I promise you, you will find a million articles about it. So, which will be helpful to kind of show your partner so she doesn't think you're just coming in with yet another idea that's your idea and not hers. Now, the idea of timeout is that you sit down and talk about it when you're in a good space. You don't wait till there's an argument. And the idea is that you get really aware of your triggers and what might be leading you into an argument. And as soon as you feel yourself going out of control, you own it yourself and you say, I'm not in a good space now. I'm really worried that I'm going to do things to damage the relationship. I need to think. I need to clear my head. I really want to resolve this with you. Very important thing to say. And I need to take a time out. So you say, we know people generally needs about 20 minutes to calm down, but you might need an hour. Say, I need some time to calm down. So you then leave. Now, it doesn't sound like there's young children here, so it's probably possible for you to go somewhere else. If you have young children, and that's where I'm talking to anyone listening here who has young children, it might be that you have a designated room that you go into so you can have a time out and just calm yourself down. It's very important that your partner respects the time out, so they don't chase you, ring you, try and contact you, and let you have a real space to settle. On the blog post I'm written, it'll tell you what to do in the timeout to calm yourself down. I won't go into that now. Very important, whether you've calmed down or not, that you go back to your partner when you say you will. And you say to your partner, either, I'm ready to talk now, let's talk, or I need some more time out and I need another 20 minutes or I need an hour or whatever. You go and have that time and you come back. Okay, so this is about building trust, because as you both follow the rules of the timeout, you start to build trust between you that you can negotiate an argument. Now, if you find that you are constantly calling timeouts because you just simply cannot calm down or cannot sort out what you're trying to sort out, it gives you two lots of important information. If the same behavior that is coming from your partner continues. So if you call a boundary and say, look, I really, really don't want us to be screaming at each other anymore. I really don't want us to be damaging our relationship anymore. And I really don't want to have conversations with you like that anymore. And this is the solution that I found for you, for us to work on. And they can't respect your boundaries. So they continue to scream at you. They don't recognise when they're angry. They use excuses, and it is an excuse, like you fire me up and I can't help it. Rubbish. Everybody has a choice. It's about linking in to your own signals about your own anger and interrupting it before it gets out of control. There is no such thing as I lost control and I couldn't help it. So if that continues, or if they do not respect, if you call the timeout and you leave, they do not respect that you need space. So they keep calling you, or they try and chase you when you leave, that sort of thing. So very important. That gives you important information, lots of important information. Number one, it might be that this person is unable to do the reflexive thinking to actually change how they are. And if they're unwilling to do that, then the relationship is not going to work at all, no matter what you do, okay? Because they have to show that they are willing to meet you halfway, yeah? If you're able to manage the angst in the relationship, but you can't sort out the problem and you keep coming back and you keep getting stuck, then that tells you that you need to have couples therapy. You need to find a good couples therapist. And it's very important that you make sure that the couples therapist that you choose has proper couples therapist training. Not, I've been doing this for years, because they could have been seeing individuals for years. Not, I'm a psychologist, because, well, when I did my training, they didn't even talk about couples. So there you are. And we did very little placement. You want to hear that if they haven't done training, that they've worked for an organisation. Now, I don't know what the organisation's called in America, but in Australia, it's Relationships Australia. In England, it is Relate. You want to hear that they've had proper couples training and experience. You do not want to be the first couple they see. And look, we all have to start somewhere. I had couples that I saw when I first started, and there's one I know that's in my mind where it was just a disaster. In fact, there's a couple in my mind that were a disaster when I first started. Everyone has to start somewhere, but you don't want to be the ones that are a disaster, put it that way. So you want someone that's couple therapist trained. I mean, I remember a friend of mine years ago when I was living in England, she wanted me to see her and her partner, and I said, no, that's such a conflict of interest, I just can't. And I said to her, make sure when you pick a couples therapist, blah, 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 blah. They decided they didn't want to pay. And they went to a guy who was a psychotherapist. And I'm not running psychotherapists down, but they're not a couples therapist. And there is a big difference. And she started describing to me how this man was getting them to place cushions around the room. And, oh, it was all very strange. It certainly wasn't the conventional couples therapy that I had learnt in Relate at the time when I was working there. And I just said, you need a couples therapist. She said, I know. You've got to pay for it. It takes years and years and years to learn this stuff. Even for me to be able to speak like this and extrapolate so much out of such a short question, it takes years and years to learn it. And that, of course, means you just have to pay for that experience. Hi, Hayley. How are you? So it's very important that if you choose a couples therapist, you choose wisely and ask questions. It's your money, Ralph, yeah? So, very important information about that. So the other thing I want to talk to you about too, that I mentioned at the beginning, is this idea that you have left your life behind. That's a really hard thing to do. And you'll have homesickness, you'll feel displaced, and you haven't got your support systems around you to help you with this situation. If you'd been at home, you would have had people around you that you could have gone to when these arguments happen, or gone to have a whinge about the monster lady, or whatever. So I really feel for you in all of this, because you've taken a punt on love. You've picked up your life, you've transported both you and your son to this lady's house, and this new partner's house, and you've got married, and it's turning out that things are perhaps not working the way you would have hoped. What can happen when you're isolated like that is you can start to expect too much of the relationship. So it's very, very important. I want you to start to separate yourself out. One of the blogs that is coming up on my site is called togetherness and separateness, negotiating togetherness and separateness in your relationship. And I want you to really think about the reliance maybe that you have on your partner. And this could even be unconscious, you know, this feeling of I gave up everything for you, so you have to look after me kind of feeling. And think about how you can start to carve a life for yourself where you are. So I want you to think about, is there a local club you can join? Can you go to a meetup? Meetup's an amazing place. Go in there and have a really good look. It's not just full of singles groups. There's all kinds of groups in there that are supportive, where you can go and make lots of really great friends. So I would really encourage you to think about how you can negotiate this togetherness and separateness, because this could be sitting under some of your arguments. It can be very hard as the partner who has asked the other partner to move, to sit with all the guilt and of having done that, of having asked you to give up your life. And it can be very difficult to sit with the resulting, it can feel really smothering, because you've got your partner there all the time. So I want you to think about that and how you can negotiate that space so that you can have a little bit of time for yourself and start to build some support systems outside of your relationship. And most importantly, if this space is working for you, come in here, and it won't be long. We're going to have a membership site, and I am very aware that I have people in this group from all parts of the world, and so I'll be looking at how I can do some Zoom sessions to accommodate everybody. So that even might be helpful to you. So please hang fire with me. It just takes time to get things sorted, because a lot of it I can't do for myself, and I want to be able to run these Zoom sessions, but I need to be able to have a platform to be able to give you all of the information that would go with those, and then load the recordings up so you can listen to them and all of that. It's so much more than Facebook, and it's taken me a long time to get my head around how it all works. And now I finally have. I know how to ask for the right thing from all the people that are helping me, and then it's a matter of waiting for them to action everything. And they don't have the same sense of urgency as I do. Anyway, so that's my answer. I would really be interested to know a little bit more about what you're arguing about, a little bit more about what's happening in these verbally abusive arguments. Another post you might find helpful, there's one called, I think, The 7 Rules of the Toxic Relationship Game, and another one called Toxic Toad Tactics or something like that. I'll put those up as well. They might be helpful for you.